Hi, my name is Fabienne Cola. I'm the president and founder of the Montreal International Black Film Festival. Welcome to the 16th annual Montreal International Black Film Festival, created by the Fabienne Colas Foundation and presented by Québécois in collaboration with Desjardins. The festival runs from September 23rd until October 4th, 2020, and we have for you a festival that is 100% online, a virtual festival where you can stay home with your family and enjoy the festival in your PJs. So do not hesitate to go and check out the program on montrealblackfilm.com and grab your all access pass so you can access over 120 films from 30 countries. Thank you for supporting Black filmmakers. Thank you for amplifying Black voices. The panel today is part of our MIBFF Black Market series presented by Telefilm Canada and Quebec Council for the Arts. So enjoy the panel.
Welcome to the panel on Racebending. Thank you very much I think we're at the Montreal Black Film Festival, and for having us all here. We've got a wonderful panel here of people who are working in various arenas of the industry, showrunner, directors. Stefan, are you directing as well?
Yeah, I direct and I write. Yeah.
You do both. Okay, beautiful. So I think, Suds, you're still writing as well, are you? Or have you left the writing to Jen?
No, I'm still writing.
Oh, you're still writing. Okay. So, okay, so I'll start that again. This is the wonderful thing about not being live. Okay. Hi, I'm Karen King. Thank you for joining us for this amazing race bending panel. We've got a wonderful panel of guests for you today. I'll tell you just a little bit about myself, and then they'll have a chance to introduce themselves, and then we'll get right into the conversation. So I am the CEO of a little company called Productions Without Borders that is really about helping the industry become more inclusive from the inside out, understanding the value of hiring diverse talent and helping diverse talent understand their value of bringing their cultural expertise to the shows that they work on. So right now, I'm just finishing up a report for the CMF on what are the systemic issues, barriers, anti-racist barriers in the industry. And then I'll be moving on to the CBC to work with them on helping them remove some of their systemic barriers. So it's a very exciting time. I swore that I was not going to do this work with anybody who wasn't ready for it. And it feels like now is the time that the world is actually ready for it. So it took 10 years. It's okay. It's all right. So wonderful. So welcome. It's going to be a very interesting conversation. So Marcia, would you please tell us a little bit about the work you've been doing and who you are and all those good things?
Okay. I am a writer for television. I have written for Private Eyes on Global, Departure on Global. I just recently finished working on Corner on the new season coming up, and I worked on all 3 seasons of Married Ghost People and was one of the showrunners for the 3rd and final season.
Very nice, very nice. And are you working on something now that you can tell us about?
I am also one of the showrunners for a new series. But it hasn't been announced yet, and I don't know if it may be announced by the time everybody sees it, and so they'll know when I'm
okay. Beautiful. Very good. Okay, in alphabetical order, Corey Bowles.
Oh, hi, I'm Corey Bowles. I'm a writer, director, actor, artist from Nova Scotia, Montreal originally, but Nova Scotia now, and I'm working in Toronto right now. I'm currently working on directing a series called Nurses, and then I'll move on to another series called Lady Dicks, and a new show that's being announced shortly. And then I work regularly on Digstown as well, and I make movies, and I write when I can. Yeah.
Welcome. Sutherland.
I'm a writer and director based in Toronto. I do mostly right now, I do episodic television, and I kind of mostly work out of Vancouver on a bunch of superhero shows. But I do my own features and series as well. So we develop stuff, and hopefully you'll see that stuff on television soon. Hopefully. So that's my story. I work with Jennifer Holness, and we have a small production company called Hungry Eyes Media.
Beautiful. Thank you. Stefan?
Yeah, my name is Stefan Verna. I'm a Montreal-based filmmaker, director, writer, also DP. And I've worked in documentaries and fiction mostly, and now I'm starting in television. So I'm developing a show right now for Radio Canada. I work in French and English. So the show that it's a show that I'm writing in French, and I'm also developing another web series. And that one actually that's going to be part of what we're going to be talking about in terms of Racebending, because the reason it was originally written in French, and now we're switching it to English, so we can go deeper into that. But yeah, I've always my career was mostly documentaries, but fiction was always something that I loved, and then in the last 2 years, I've sort of gone back to my first love, which is fiction.
Okay, beautiful. So you were saying that you are working on something right now that you're translating into English, and as you translate it, you're also changing the races of people?
No, I mean, in the case, in relation to the topic, what's been interesting is that we've been pitching. Me and my producer have been pitching this story for almost a year. Originally, it was supposed to be a web series, and then we're like, okay, I think the scope of it will make it into a TV show. And then when we showed it to other people, they were like, okay, there's some real quality in it. And it's without giving away too much of the story, but basically the main characters are all people of color, right? The two main actors are Black, but then the sort of supporting cast is from different parts of the world, and so as we were writing the story, some of the feedback that I was getting, because it's based in Montreal, is that they were saying, well, the way you're the way you're portraying Quebec culture is too racist, right?
It's too racist.
It's too racist, right? And then I was like, okay, well, I think that because there are white characters in the film, in the project, and for me, they're fairly nuanced. Like all the characters are nuanced, especially like the main white character goes through an arc, of like discovering blah blah blah. But they were like, yeah, but that it's for a Quebec white audience, it's not sympathetic enough. And I was like, okay. And then they're like, then why don't you make? Because then there's a whole. The film deals a bit with immigration, right? And then so they're like, well, why don't you have like? Because at one point, like one of the character seeks refuge in sort of a working class neighborhood that's mostly Latino, right? And then they're like, well, why does that character live in a white family? And so the white family is the one that saves them, And then I was like, why? They're like, well, yeah, so that white people, when they watch the film, we can show that.
And so are your executives white?
Am I what?
Are the executives who are asking these questions white?
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So are they saying it's too racist, like not anti-Black racism? They're like thinking that it's making them feel uncomfortable type thing? Because are they flipping the term around?
No, they never said it was racist. No. They just said that I'm portraying Quebec culture in a extremely racist way. There are elements in the film where you do see sort of the sort of like Trumpish type of which exists in Quebec. I played hockey all my life. I I know that shit is real, So, but there's a white character who goes through a certain arc, and he's not racist. It's just like he's ignorant, and then, So for me, like, I grew up in a very multicultural environment. I've many friends. Like, I'm around white people. I don't have this view of like white people are bad. Like I don't. And my, so for me, I had never been told that. I was kind of like, what? Really?
That was the first time you had to deal with that. What about the rest of you? Have any of you ever had this situation where they've wanted you to change the race of one of the characters that you've created?
Change the race to white, or change?
Either way.
I mean, I definitely have been in situations where the characters were written as white and then became people of color when we got to casting.
Right.
That's
the standard. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think I've ever been asked to change no, I don't think I've ever been asked to change a character of color to a white person, but there's on most of the shows that I have worked on, there really haven't been that many, it's like everybody's
characters of color, you mean?
So
that many characters of color that you've written?
Not really, no. I mean, usually, like, if I'm writing an episode, there's going to be like maybe the guest star of that episode might be, or the storyline might be related to that, and so you'll have people. Oh, you know what? Once I did write a story, and I had envisioned that the character was Black, but then when we did the auditions, the person who auditioned, who we really liked, was not Black. And it felt like the executives really wanted us to cast a Black person like that. And it was like, it's okay. Like, not, or it'll be like, it's like the bad guy, they wanted the bad guy to be white. And we were like, but now it's weird because like everybody, it's like kind of like a world where it's like all Black people or like people of color. So it's weird how just this white person infiltrates this world to kill people, I feel like it's really going to stand out when it's that guy, the one, so like things like that. But I think that's kind of like, people were very wary of like casting like the bad person being a person of color. So without kind of, I think, looking at the bigger picture all the time for that, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, it shouldn't be like the one-off character that you write is always a person of color who's like the bad guy. But anyways, that has happened. I think that has been for me the biggest challenge. Like, that now people are really into having like the Black person be like the hero or be a good person or be, like now they're not allowed to be nuanced in this way, and they end up, it's like they're the judge, they're the doctor or the whatever, and then they're not getting like the lead or the juicy role, because then it's like, ooh, but then they would be like a person who did this,
Yeah, I've had in various incarnations in some of our work, they've tried to say, well, why can't you make one of the characters white? Then you'll widen the audience. And we're like, well, this is a romantic comedy. My first feature, Love, Sexy, and the Bones, they tried to get us to change one of the characters to a white person. And I was like, no. And that was like, it held us back for a little while. And then finally we broke through. But it was like this thing where it was like, well, 2 Black leads, Canada is not going to work, blah, blah, blah. And so we stuck to our guns and didn't, we just didn't take any shorts. And then, and then that film did well, whatever. But then we had a romantic comedy about two lawyers, and there were 2 Black leads. And we developed it at a network that shall be remain nameless. And we were going pretty far with it. And then it was like, well, it's 2 Black leads. It's not going to happen. And so then there was a discussion about changing one of the characters to a white person. And we're like, no, we don't want to do that. And so we said, no, it's not the show we want to make. So that's, been the thing. Like sometimes, you just like have to stick to your guns, and sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But I haven't done that. I just said no anytime that anybody tried to do that to us. because life is a bit too short, and there's only so many films and television programs that we're going to be able to make. So I just generally say no.
It could really change. It's not just like just sub in a white person for this black, like it's going to change the story. It's probably going to change the story when they're not both black, like not necessarily just make it different, like it could be anything.
The thing with it is, and why for them it's not a big ask, is because colorblind casting has been the way that they've done their casting all along, which means that for them it means nothing changes. So it's just like, just put in, we'll just get a black guy because we need some diversity. We'll just bring in some people of all different colors, and whoever we like best, we're going to hire. And it has nothing to do with, and they try to make it somebody, of course, who has no family or who has no, somebody who's not going to affect anything too much. And so for them, it was really interesting. I was listening to, I don't know if you guys have read White Fragility yet. Have you? Yeah.
I've heard about it. I heard it's a number one.
I'm dealing with all my.
It is a must
I don't want to read
read. It's a must read, and here's why: because it helps you understand what the hell they're doing. Because when they have these conversations, for white people, race does not exist. It's not a concept, right? So to be able to go back and forth doesn't matter to them because it's really not, it doesn't affect their lives one way or another. They're always going to be where they are. And so for them, race is fluid in many ways. So
well, I think that, to be honest, what our experience with executives who, for these little bitty parts, like, 1 line or 2 line or 3 line parts, yeah, you can say that, you can sub in anybody here. But when you're talking about a series lead with all the support infrastructure that a series lead has to have, a family, a culture, a point of view, like all these things. If you have like a character that has like 3 lines and they're just coming to give some information and it's like, or they're in the red jersey and then they get killed, it doesn't really matter. But when we're dealing with something that, this character, I've created this character based on this person, and this is the arc that they have. They have a grandfather. They have a whole support structure. It's not. You can't just like move like these chess pieces around. And I think that colorblind casting, can be a tool, but it also can be a weapon. And so I think that when we're talking about using a character, and then if you're having it within a context that uses some sort of a racial analysis, some sort of a class analysis, some sort of a caste analysis, then we're actually getting at something. But if we're just, this person's, a generic, we're just talking about a generic characters then,
Yeah.
And that's the kind of projects that I don't like to do generally.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'll say going back on that sort of thing, like people start asking questions, or they sometimes executives or casting even will inadvertently do things that they're used to or it's ingrained to. And I say this in the sense that we had it on a show, one of the shows I work on. We had very specific casting for exploring young prostitution, and where we're from, the young prostitution that we're exploring is actually through the issue is actually in middle class white girls. That's where it actually happens. So the casting right away, when they sent us everything, we just had a lot of black girls and kids of color, and we were just like, no, this isn't like A, this is annoying, and B, like we specifically said it should be this, and like we literally had to have a conversation because the people were upset. The cast were upset because they were like, this doesn't look good. This isn't fair. You want us to be diverse, but then you're only making white this role. And we were just sitting back going, this is actually like something we're truly exploring, but this is your instinct that it, and it's interesting when it becomes something they feel is harmful, their instinct or the gut instinct is to sort of bounce back on that. Now, at the same time, when we say, hey, look, we don't want to be portrayed in these ways all the time, like we don't want to have to be the thug or the criminal or these things, then that's sort of like, sometimes we could be looked at as get over it, or that's a hurt feeling. But then it's a larger deal when when it goes the other way as well.
Especially
And I find that
when it's young white girls. They're very sensitive about when young white girls and how they're portrayed. Trust me. I know
yeah,
that.
and it was just, it's actually a very real thing where we came from. But that's also like, that's also, it comes from a thing where a lot of people in the industry may not necessarily know that, but we're from those communities, so we know. But it's fascinating to hear the pushback on that. I'll say another thing is that I had a story one time where I was pitching a story to a company in 2014 that had said to me, we're not really in, like, we don't really get the racial genre at the time. And I was just like, that really stayed with me, the idea of the racial genre. And that weekend, Ferguson happened. And, my stuff was pretty riotous, my what I was pitching. And then I heard from them again. And that just made me, want to like flip a table, because I'm like, actually now it's, this is the thing, is that we're still working on the idea that we're moving forward and trying to do these things. It's actually fighting with like completely being monetized at the same time. And it's just like, that'll be the instinct. Even now, as we see things changing, and we're saying, like, you see what happens with the Oscars is suddenly there'll be an equal amount of, okay, let's do this, let's balance out, but there'll be an equal amount of, let's monetize off this and capitalize, where it goes in it, like, it's like a bit of a weapon too,
But even in that case, I mean, at least it's you making that, what happened, I felt like around Ferguson or after that, it's like you have these shows and then they want to talk about the issue, but your show isn't designed to put Black people at the center of it. Your show isn't, so then somehow it's like these white people become the center of the Black Lives Matter. It's like how they feel about what's happening with Black Lives Matter. And then they're coming in to be like the saviors. And I'm just saying, it's like, that's how your show is built. Your show is built to make these people the heroes. But then it's like, but then you're taking the story and like mutating it to fit that thing, to be current, and then not doing it any real justice, but not putting, I think, like, not putting Black people at the center of that story.
Yeah, and I think also for me, what I find really frustrating, and sometimes I don't know if it's racism or people are living in a bubble or people are just flat out ignorant. Like, it's probably a cocktail of all that. Is that one of the things that I keep hearing, especially in Quebec and French, is that they're like, well, the people that watch French television usually live outside Montreal. They're over 50 or 60, and they live en région. Like, they live like, so outside of the urban areas. And then so therefore they're mostly white, and according to them, right? And then I was like, okay, maybe that's maybe what your surveys say, but the white people that I know, they're all watching Atlanta. Like, they're watching across the age, they're watching Black shows. I mean, I grew up when, Cosby Show was the thing. And I mean, white folks were watching Cosby Show, and I'm sure people in Quebec City were watching Cosby Show, I mean? So this myth that white Quebec, and I'm going to use Quebec as an example, that you need to sort of like dilute your Black content to fit an imagined demographic. I find it's kind of a way of not, it's using the bottom line to never address the systemic issues of your institution. But
is it not so that there's a large Black population in Quebec? So wouldn't it make sense to be trying to create content that actually appeals to them? I
mean, it's kind of the chicken and the egg, right? Because what I tell them, I was like, well, your demographic of your audience is aging, right? And you're losing out on all the 20, 30, and 40. And so if you started to make work that was more diverse, you would have a better chance. So it's like the more you keep doing white shows, the more you're alienating the growing people of color.
The population.
Exactly. Yeah, in a way, you're kind of yourself fulfilling your own thing, because of course it's only going to be like 60-year-old white folks watching your show because you're only producing content that's for them.
Exactly.
And then so I started I co-founded a group called Black on Black Film in Montreal like 4 years ago, and we've been doing a lot of advocacy work, especially around French CBC, which is Radio Canada, to make that point. And you know, they've given, you know, we've had sessions with them and stuff, and it's only now that the George Floyd incident happened, a bit going back to what Corey was talking about, is that suddenly now there's like there's a real interest, you know. But then it's like there's a real interest, but then it can't be too radical. It can't be like, for example, the show that I'm writing.
Who's saying that though? Who's saying it can't?
Conditional. It's conditional.
Who's what?
Who's saying it can't be too radical?
Well, the people, like the people from the network. The network are saying that they're not using the word radical. They're using the word because basically in the story that I'm writing, the support network is all people of color, right? The people, they're not all black, but I mean the people that help each other out, they're Arabs or they're Asian, whatever, right?
And that's right.
And they're all like, you know, people who from recent immigration, right? So I wanted to show that kind of solidarity, you know. But for them, it was like it was very threatening to have a show where white people are not necessarily the ones, like, you know, there are white characters in the film, in the series, but they're not the ones who are like, who have the biggest arc, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so it made them uncomfortable. And my producer, he was kind of trying to play, and he's white, and he's trying to play the middleman between that, because I was like, this is, you know, you hired me to write this thing, you know who I am, not, you know. And then so at the end he was like, okay, let's just apply, let's just present it to CBC instead, because that's yeah, he was like, yeah, because he knew, having worked in both languages, he's like, if we present it in English, it's gonna have a much better chance of getting an ear that if we keep pounding in the French sector.
That's so interesting, because it used to be 20 years ago, it was the French who always had a person of color. There was always a black person in every French film, you know, whereas we couldn't get them. There was one, and for some of us, that's how we lived our lives, right? I was in Vancouver, and I was there, you know, and I found the French films actually reflected that. So it's interesting to see that they're not still moving forward in that regard. My conversation around the race bending is that it's an opportunity for us, and I see it like that an opportunity that's often lost. And when I went to see Tyler Perry about 10 years ago or so did for Colored Girls. Yes. And I thought that was a perfect opportunity to expand the audience and to bring in different colored girls. And I was kind of sad that they didn't take that opportunity and do that, and left it in the space of the black, you know, story, because I felt that, you know, so many black playwrights, so many black artists aren't known to the broader public, and it would have been a great opportunity to sort of say, okay, if you had a Chinese girl and a Native girl, and, you know, and Hispanic girl, have all those faces there, and to bring those audiences to this, what was a very powerful work, and people found, I think black people found that it was kind of depressing from a black perspective, because it was sort of, again, you know, black men and black women are so screwed up. So there's a way for us to kind of expand the narrative when we expand the racial identity of the characters that we play with, and doing it in a forum or with a property that is actually well known, I think is actually a really interesting way to go about it. And I know that, you know, I think they were casting Ariel as a black woman, and, you know, all the moms went ballistic because how could she have red hair when she's, you know, black, blah, blah, blah.
The mermaid.
Oh, is that the Little Mermaid? Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But I think it's an opportunity for us to kind of, you know, I do believe it's an opportunity for us to expand our audiences. And when I talk about it in the context of, look at the demographics of the population now, you know, and don't look at the demographics nationally. look at the demographics of your TV market, the one where you're going to be getting your ratings. And that's your ratings audience. And that's who you have to create your entertainment for, because that's how your bills are being paid. So if you're looking at that particular market and you see, oh, 30% of my market is South Asian, 30% of my market is Chinese, and 10% of that market is Black, then I've got to do something that's actually going to speak to those people rather than pretend we're not there or do the same old that bores us. You know, it's how do you make us sit up and lean in, right?
I think it's their job to fill their slots. I think as a creator, I think sometimes it's dangerous to sort of to come in. I mean, I'm thinking for myself, you know, but I try not to come into a project with an agenda, like a clear agenda. Like I really let the characters sort of like take me to places. And what Suds was saying before, I thought for me was really important, because when you create a character, you really create a cultural space around that character. And I find that sometimes it's dangerous when people think that things are interchangeable, and not realizing that at the core, you know, people come from, they have ancestry, they have a community, they have all these things. And it's when you're writing a film, I think it's important to do that, because I think what's happening now in Hollywood and I think in some TV is that you have these Black characters that are just, again, I don't want to say that, I don't want to essentialize Black people, but they're kind of like, they're Black because they have to. They don't seem to carry any culture with them, you know? An example that I can bring is that there's a film called Boost, which came out maybe 2-3 years ago. It's made by a white Montreal filmmaker, and the two main characters are Black, right? And I know the producer of that, and I saw the film, and I was kind of like, you know, it's very stereotypical, like, you know, the two criminals, you know, they fuck around with white chicks, and it's kind of like your, you know, typical like Black thugs, that, you know, kind of thing. And then I you know, but the film is it's well done, like it's a well done film, and I think they were
film. Yeah, I saw it. Yeah,
one of them, like it's well executed, like it's, you know, I can appreciate for the craft, it's well done and all that stuff. And then so I ran into the producer, and he's like, oh, what did you think of it? And I was like, well, you know, it's, you know, hats off for making a good feature, which is hard in Canada. But I had a problem with I thought it was stereotypical. And what I found, I just found like who they were, their culture behind it was very, very thin.
Well, because if they don't have anybody on the team who's going to be able to provide that richness, they're stuck, right? All they can do is continue to run in that rat race, which is what they know from the other films they've seen.
But the scariest thing is that I found out that, you know, that film was supposed to be because it was set in NDG, which is like kind of a more Black neighborhood, right? Yeah. But originally it was supposed to be in Park Extension, which is a very South Asian part of Montreal. Huh. And then for some reason, the two leads, like somehow they lost their two leads. And so within a month, they went from, we're filming 2 South Asians to 2 Black people, and that's it. And that's it. And then and I was like, when he told me that, I was like, well, yeah, that's what you see in the film. You really see a film that's just you just plugged in these 2 Black characters in this criminal world, and then you don't get any nuance, you know? So, for example, they're bad students, they're teachers, they're everybody, like the authority around them is all white. And I was like, why couldn't their teacher be Black? You know what I mean? Like, why can't you understand that you can't make these? Unfortunately, I wasn't able to. I saw it online. I wasn't able to go to the screening, because what I'm telling you tonight is exactly what I would have said. Is like, yeah, congrats on making a solid film, but you really missed out on really showing a part of Black Anglophone Montreal that we just never see on the screen. You just kind of just.
When you were growing up, you had Black teachers.
I did, yeah, I did. Yeah, I did. I mean, not a lot, but I did. Like, my physics teacher was Black. I think I had a history teacher, that was black. But I mean, I went to a high school that definitely was very multicultural, and my daughter, she has like maybe a third of her teachers, like just quite a few black teachers.
Awesome.
Different time, obviously, right now, but no, I had contact with that. I knew black cops. I knew black doctors. Like I was around that. Also, it's also like my class where I come from. So I'm around. I grew up with like black professionals. So for me, it's not like a foreign thing.
Right, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
I never had a black teacher. Even I took Caribbean literature, and the teacher was a white Jamaican. Not even that class could there have been a black teacher.
With a Jamaican accent or what?
She did. She could, she would.
Yeah.
So she would tell us how, when she would go, people would never think that she was Jamaican, and then they would but she could understand everything and whatever. I mean, she was a nice lady. I'm not I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I had one teacher in my entire education, from like K to university. Only one teacher, and that was a post-colonial literature course in university.
Wow.
I had a guidance counselor.
That's it.
Wow.
Oh,
That's it.
yeah, that's
That's
it.
That's it. And I grew up in a community where, everyone was black, but all the teachers were.
Oh, really? That's
Yeah.
interesting.
I mean, we had a couple of we had some people of color. We had no black teachers. Just not until same thing. Not until university for me.
Mhm.
Yeah, my mother was the only black teacher at her high school, and I had her. She was my grade 12 French teacher, and then I think we had somebody in science. We had a biology teacher who was also from Trinidad, and then we had a Chinese physics teacher, or a Japanese physics teacher, actually. Yeah. It's tough.
One thing that I wanted to bring up is I don't know if you heard that the new James Bond is going to be a black woman. Did you hear that?
Oh, come on. What happened to Idris? I thought Idris was going to get a crack at it.
Is that true? Or
Well, I
Is
don't know.
that true? Yeah.
She's with him. She's another 00, but she's not James Bond.
Well, no, because I before we before we got online, I was like, oh, maybe I should do a bit of research on Racebending, because I had my own view of it. But I was like, and then I saw this video, this podcast on YouTube, and they were talking about they showed a poster of 007 and there's a black woman. And what was interesting in the conversation is that they were saying, well, why couldn't they have made her like 88? Like, why couldn't they have created another character, right? Not take the franchise of 007, but make it still like you're a British spy, still you're with MI6 or whatever. What is the
MI6.
What, or MI5? I don't know.
MI, whatever. And
So it's like, well, they did Doctor Who, right? They made Doctor Who into a white woman. See, it's very unlikely that they would go straight from a white guy to a black woman. I thought they would have given the white women the chance.
me too. Maybe they were misinformed, but I thought it was interesting that sometime when and again, I think sometimes when this political correctness comes in really very clumsy, it can instead of being like, okay, we're going to create like a black spy who's like a superhero, but she's not going to be James Bond. She's going to be something else, right? And then and instead of being like, oh, okay, now because we got to catch up with our white guilt, we're going to transform 007 into a black woman.
It's funny because I don't think of it as political correctness. I think I'm completely market driven on this conversation. For me, it's a market driven conversation. It's not about political correctness at all. It's about you have an audience that you're not serving, and you better start serving it.
Isn't the idea that 007 is a code anyway? Like it's just passed on as it is. So they just pass the mantle on to whoever takes it up. Like you just are in the position of 007. Isn't that how that works?
Sorry, I'm not an expert.
This will be like the fourth one.
There's a number of agents, and but there's 7, there's 8, there's 5, there's a bunch of 00 agents. That's a special category of agent that with the license to kill, and she's another 00. But she's not James Bond. She's a completely different character.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Different character. Yeah.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, because I thought it was a bit extreme. But yeah.
So Corey, Marcia, we haven't heard from you guys in a minute. What are you thinking about this? And what were you thinking about it when you got called to talk about this? Like, what are the challenges that you face, and how do you feel it could actually work to your advantage? Or
Corey, do you want to go first?
Sure. Okay. Well, okay. So, I mean, race bending in general, the idea of race bending, like, and knowing where it came from and how it's become a sort of movement now that people are upset about when it's encouraged to get, because race bending is usually, the idea is that when something is specifically made for a culture or to be like specifically with Black, the idea that you would never, like, they would take something like Black Panther and turn that character white because it's marketable. And we're back to the idea of marketing films, which is, for any of us that work in television, you do always hear, like, if you don't hear, can this person be white, you do get an idea of, can we pepper this more, or how can we introduce this to the other market? And that's what's so interesting with this idea of, people now getting mad and changing the idea of what race bending is, and taking the idea of whitewashing and saying, blackwashing or Asian washing, when all of a sudden a character that was never really specified as is given that chance. And I guess what happens with that conversation, what I find interesting, is that when people are upset about it, everyone's like, chill your jets. And you're like, well, no, actually, this person doesn't need, like, the Prince of Persia doesn't have to be someone that's not from Persia. Like, find someone from Persia, or, and the idea that for so long in Hollywood and in film and in television, Black characters or characters of color always had to be defined by that. So it's like, anytime you had a character like Morgan Freeman in Robin Hood, he was defined by his culture. It wasn't, there was never that switch. So all of a sudden what happens is, when you finally get these roles, or you finally get these heroes or these things, these adaptations, and you switch it for someone that's specifically, like, it's like, there's not a lot of space or spots or real estate for people of color. So all of a sudden you're taking it away. So now when you have this new idea of people going, oh my gosh, there's a queer superhero with Batgirl or Batwoman, and you're like, well, Batwoman's always been queer, so like, you obviously don't read the comic. But the idea that there's a pushback against that, and it's like, well, who is that taking a role from, though? So that's what it is so interesting to me. Like, even when we talk about things like 007, like, for me, I could care less, because it's like, there's an idea that, when we get, like, you're not going to change Captain America, because the idea that he is like the equivalent of, or the opposite of, a Nazi, let's say, or something like that. But a lot of those other characters are interchangeable, and the only reason they were made that way was because it was a norm. They didn't sit down specifically go, this person has to be white. Yeah. So, so I find it an interesting thing. On the other hand, I had a show that I was very specific, and I'm very specific about my characters. I write Black characters, and I write other characters too, but the stories are from that world. It doesn't mean I don't have other people. It doesn't mean that in some cases, in some of my stuff, leads have been not Black. Like, I had a way, mind you, he had the heart of a Black man, but like, transplanted. But it's that the idea of that is because A, I know that, and B, I want to see that on screen as well. I want to relate to that. So I don't see, I find the debate interesting. I've never, as an actor, I've gotten roles from adaptations that were written as a 6-foot blonde white character, and the novelist and the author cast me in their TV movie and said he embodied the character. And she said, I described him that way in the book, but my story is when I saw him, that's who he was. And I think that that's the interesting thing, is as long as it embodies the character. And in some cases, if you're doing, The Last Airbender, where it came from, that's a little bit much. And specifically, it's because they need to bank it. And that's always saying that people of color aren't box office. So that's where the whole thing is an interesting debate and kind of a piss off. Yeah. Absolutely. They absolutely still say it.
Panther, after Scandal, they're still saying that?
You know what? So when the leaks came out, like the Sony leaks that came out like a few years ago, they were actually saying that. They were saying, oh yeah, even though you have like Denzel and Will Smith, in the leaks between I think it was Amy Pascal and the heads of Sony, they were exactly saying that. They're like, well, black people they sell well in North America, but they don't sell well in Asia and stuff like that, which is totally not true. But
if you look at what's happening in the Asian music scene, it's black culture that they're all into. So how can they say that it doesn't travel? All it does is travel.
A lot of it is self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like even though the facts say otherwise, they create that thing, and it justifies putting a cap on, oh, if you're a black lead, then your budget's going to be this and this and that. So even though we have so much proof of like Michael Jackson, James Brown, I mean, you have so much black culture that transcends race, border, whatever. In their mind, they're still, And so when I read the leaks from Sony, I was like blown away. I'm like, what? You're putting a cap on Denzel? Like, are you kidding me? So it just, for me, I was just like, so imagine if these people are saying that, the people that Corey and Suds and Masha and myself were dealing with, they're gonna create that. So as a creator, you're constantly having to find a way to deal with that without alienating them, right? Because you can't be the angry black man or woman. You got to find a way to stick around, like not lose the deal, right? But then be like, okay, I'm committed to that. I'm committed, and it's coming from a place of like of wholeness. I'm like, okay, there's a reason. You have to always justify. To be like, this is important because this. You got to come. Like whenever I have meetings like that, I have to come hyper prepared because they're gonna try to find ways where that character can be switched. And I'm like, no, because if you make it to a white Quebecois, it's gonna change this and this and this and this. And it's only when I've given them 15 reasons, they're like, okay, cool, But
you have to be able to explain why you made your choice.
Over explain it, for sure.
Over explain it?
Oh yeah.
There's some changing. Like there's some changing now. I find that I'm working with a group now that on a show, and they're more hyper aware of it, and it's almost too hyper aware of it to the point where like, well, we don't want to. We want to focus on these two characters, and you're like, well, let's not cut everyone out because you want to like elevate. Like I feel good that you want to be a part of this, but like, let's find the right reasons why, and then actually you don't want to toss out a really good character that's actually a part of the truth, So there's that fine balance.
I think that's where it becomes most important or most problematic is when we're actually talking about shows that have a historical reality, right? So it's a story that's based in history, and then they've taken the black character who was actually right beside, General Grant, during the war, and he just, if you look at the paintings, that character, that black man is right there beside him. But when they make the movie, he becomes a white man. That's when I think it's problematic, when they actually take away the accomplishment and the achievement and the glory from the black or the brown character and give it to the white person instead in order to make it more whatever palatable. But I really think that the opportunity for us right now, and I would say, if anybody's saying to you we can't go that far, I think now is the time for us to push to go as far as we need to go, because there has never been a time like this before. There's never been a time in our industry like this before. We've been asking for, equity, and we've been asking for access, and we've been asking for all of this. But now we can ask for everything that we really want and need. And I think we look at it from the perspective of what are our populations in the TV markets, and looking at the anti-Black racism perspective. As Black people, we need to have an opportunity to correct all the wrong that has been done, and to undo all that damage is going to take us a lot of content. We've got to be able to create a lot of content that speaks the truth about who we are in all of our fullness, and therefore we need at least 25% of the budget in order to accomplish that. And when I was at the NFB, we had 20% of the budget working for people of color to actually create content so that we could play catch up. And I think the same thing is the case now. You have to be able to, transform the way people see Black people. It's up to us to do that, to have more, than just what goes on in the world of crime, and to really be able to fulfill that full view of who we are as Black Canadians, and the diversity of who we are as Black Canadians, because I think that's the other piece that's missing from the pie.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's a I see like there's a danger because of the situations that Corey is describing, is that there's a danger of jumping on certain situation because the person is like, oh, I'm looking for a Black writer or Black this, and then once you're in that situation, and that's happened to me also, is they come and seek you because to fill the box, and then when you bring your Blackness, they're like, whoa, I wasn't asking for all that. And you're like, it's like, what do you mean all that? So in a way, and again, it's like, when I teach, I always tell people that in a way, like to have a longevity in this industry is really you're building relationships, and so sometimes you have to sort of like figure out situation, and you have to know. It's kind of when they say you have to know when to hold them and when to fold them. You have to push the situation to a point, and then at some point, if you're like, okay, this is crossing the line of my integrity, then you have to know when to pull out,
right?
And not feel like this is your last opportunity. That sometime if you get into that place where you're like, okay, I feel like I'm myself, you have to. And I've had situations like that when I've done that, and then I meet the people years later, and they're like, "Oh my God, they come back to me, and then they're like," and I was like, "Oh, I'm surprised." And they're like, "Yeah, because you really taught me something that back then, and now like it's like." And so not to be afraid to, hold your ground without being inflexible. But at one point, if it's crossing a part of you, and you're like, if I go down, and to really like say it, and then I think it's gonna pay off later, because keeping your integrity as a creator, I think, is so important. It's so
you have to be able to look your kids in the face,
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Marsha? Remember when you were saying, Corey, you want to go first?
I know, and then the conversation just went on, and I didn't.
I know. I didn't want you to feel forgotten.
No, not at all. I think it's so funny. It's just like, it just strikes me as so like the irony of it, right? Like when you have these side characters, it's like, doesn't matter if they're Black, it's like, doesn't matter, just put a Black person. But then when you take the white lead, it's like, well, this is a huge problem. It can't possibly be a person. It's like, it's interchangeable when you want it to be interchangeable, when it's convenient for you. When you're standing behind this white person, it doesn't matter at all. And it only seems to matter when it comes to the lead role. That's when all of it would change, and it would, I feel like, I think for me, what is like the most challenging is that I find that people are very interested now in this kind of race bending, and what if we made it, what if it was a Black lead, or all of those things. But often, still the people who are making these decisions, who are giving notes, who are doing all of these things are not people of color. And so it's like, and they have like kind of good intentions, but I would say like kind of without a lot of it's like the situation itself is nuanced. It's not like the characters need to be nuanced and the situation needs to be nuanced, you know, like correcting it's like the same thing. It's like very simple to be like, okay, we'll just never make a bad guy a black person again. Like that's not the answer. And that's not the answer we're asking for. It's so much more nuanced than that. But it's like, ooh, we have to change this. And so here's what we're going to do without any like education or any like real interest, I think, in like, what are we trying to do here? I think we know. I think we are pretty clear on that, but I often feel on the other side, it's like that intention hasn't come with a lot, you know, with a lot of like well-rounded knowledge about what we're trying to accomplish as creators and what we want to see on television and in film going forward. So I think that's the challenge we face going forward.
You know, what's interesting about what you just said was that we know, and I don't know that we always know. I think that, you know, there's a lot of content that's been made out there, especially in the last 10 years, where it's been created by and directed by and written by a person of color, but every single line of it is just dripping in racism. It's like, how did you let yourself be manipulated to this degree where you have created this piece of, like, the KKK couldn't have done a better job.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And it's again, because we're in these situations where somebody's holding the purse strings, we want to work so bad, we want to have our break so badly that we let them do whatever the heck we want, and we don't realize until, well, I don't even know if they ever realized, because they were promoting their show, and I'm like, if I made this show, the last thing I would do is promote it. It's just so.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Lord, have mercy.
What are you talking about? Like,
I know.
I don't know what you're talking. Like, can you give us a show or an area, a story area?
Well, this was a story that was written by, it was an Asian person who wrote it, and it was a series. I think it might have been a web series, and it was essentially about diversity, and it was just really offensive and insulting and really problematic. And I just like, it wasn't anything you made, so.
No, I'm just wondering because, you know, if somebody's out there making, you know, this Trojan horse racist shit, what is this?
Yeah, no, and
Speak
it's
up.
not even like the part of it that's so problematic is that, you know, it's the same thing that happens to us in corporate spaces. It's like when they want to get rid of you or when they want to say what they want to say, but they don't want to say it, they bring one of us in who's going to say it so that, you know, we can't say it's the white person because they brought in a black consultant who's going to tell them, you know what I mean? It's everywhere. So you just have to watch.
One of the things that happens, I find this is happening in you know, the last sort of 5-7 years, is that they're now creating spaces for writers of color in story departments.
Yes, that was bad.
So in a very junior position.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like, I don't know if you can speak to this, Marsha, without stepping on any toes or whatever, but like, and again, like I'm talking about the North American market because I got a lot of friends in LA who are going through the rounds, so they get their fee is basically paid by, you know, a studio through a diversity program, so they're the diversity hire. So you can have 1 or 2 writers, and sometimes these showrunners are like, no, I don't want anybody in; it's going to mess up my thing, and they don't want it. Like they're literally given a free person. And they're like, no. And a lot of like writers of color have been on this thing. So it's like there's a hierarchy. So you start off as a sort of a staff writer, and then you get to be a story editor, executive story editor, you know, producer, co-producer, and that's how it goes. And so what happens is a lot of the black writers of color, they keep on getting these diversity hires and they don't rise up.
Oh, wow.
So they may be on their 4th or 5th job and they're still a staff writer. So what happens, though, a lot of times is that they come in and their voices aren't really valued. And so you may have like a character of color and that person might have the exact same experience and it all shakes out. And in truth, like they're saying, oh, well, how about this or how about that? And they're like, no. And their voices are batted down. And one of the ways, you know, there was a recent article about a show called All Rise. And this is a show in America. and it's a show about a black female judge. And so a friend of mine was on the show, and her comments are in the New York Times, so you can take a look at the
yeah. I have the article here. Yeah.
Yeah, you can take a look at the article. But the thing is that if your voices aren't valued by the showrunner, then there's no point to having me in the room. And so, to the point where the white showrunner was like shouting at the person of color who they essentially hired for their voice, saying that, well, this is not something that she would do. She wouldn't have this conversation as a black woman because of X, Y, and Z. Or because the just scenes she just, went through this thing. And this person was saying, no, that's not true, da 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 da, and defending and not listening. And so I think that if we're going to be brought in the room, we have to be listened to. And if we're going to be brought into the room always at a junior position, then there's no point, because diversity without power is just window dressing. It's just pictures for the brochure. So that, and when, opportunities are offered like that, I think people have to, sometimes it's tough, to say no to those opportunities. And sometimes it's say, well, this is what I require. It's very hard in this country because everybody's so nice.
Well, what's interesting about that is that there's a woman on nurses, actually. No, coroner. There's a black woman who's on coroner, and you can always tell which line she wrote, right? It's like, there's another, there it is. From everything else so blatantly. And that is the challenge, because here's the challenge. You've got an industry where we are organized in such a militaristic fashion that we haven't figured out how we can actually allow that junior person to contribute to us. And so part of the work that I've done with Correctors Without Borders is actually create a process that allows the information to travel up to the department that it needs to travel to, so they can actually end up on screen, no matter where it comes from, even if it's your driver who knows, you guys are about to make a complete, ass of yourselves. Somebody's going to save your bacon. Let them save your bacon. Like, do you want your show to be renewed for another year or not? That's what's at stake. And so the challenge is when we learn about each other newly and we learn about other cultural groups. I remember Cyrus, the filmmaker that I was working with, came to me and said, I was just talking to this Chinese guy in the film, and he said that he grew up in this household where he couldn't speak the same language as his parents. And I'm like, yeah, right. I had 2 little kids. There's no way you could raise your kids without being able to speak the same language. What the hell is that? Well, in fact and indeed, they do it all the time. So this is very normal in the Chinese community, very normal in Italian communities, like very normal for those immigrant families that come over with language, differences. But I didn't know that. I dismissed it completely out of hand. And so in order for us to really be heard, that's what we have to do, is suspend our disbelief. And we have to be able to trust that this Black man knows that, no, people in university don't carry guns, or, this, you know what I mean? It's like, you have to be willing to listen and trust that, okay, I don't know. They know what I don't know. But we have an industry that's organized such that if they don't know it, it's not worth knowing. that's kind of how it operates, right? So it's really about changing people's understanding and really help them appreciate the fact that you don't know. And even us as Black filmmakers don't know what it is that Chinese filmmakers or that Chinese audience needs, or the Japanese audience, or the Latino audience. Like, we all need to be working in an inclusive environment so that we can actually get the benefit of the cultural expertise of each other and be willing to say, okay, sure, okay, let's try it. Let's do it.
I actually say about Coroner, just because I just worked on it, it actually was like the only room, I think like one of the few rooms I'd worked on that was almost entirely people of color. There were two Black women, there was an Asian woman, there was an Indigenous woman. And in fact, when I was then trying to find writers for the show that I'm working on now, it was like the only place I could reference was that job, because in all the other cases, I was the only one. right? So I never worked with writers of color. So all the writers, I know them from around the way. I know them personally, but I hadn't worked with any of them because normally it's like I'm the only person in the room. And Coroner was the only show that I had ever worked on where I worked with other people. So I could be like, oh, I just worked with that person on Coroner. I just worked with that person on Coroner. Like, it was really quite, and that experience I felt was, I mean, it was so good on so many levels, but like, that's a good example where it's like that show is based on a series of books.
Okay.
And in the show, there's the coroner, Jenny Cooper, and then there's the cop. And in the book, the cop is white. And when they made the show, the cop was black. And I know that like it was like things would happen and they would have to rethink them. Like this black cop is maybe not going to respond to this as the white cop would have in this situation. He's not going to just take, like, you know, he's going to feel different. And so, and the value, I think, of having all those people in the room is for someone to be able to say, you know what, I don't think he's going to do this. And the value of having more than one person in the room is that you don't have to be out on that limb. Like, as Suds was saying, you're in the room and you're like the only one and the most junior person. It's like when you're speaking up, it can feel so big. And I remember, like, on my first job, I did it because I felt like this is why I'm here. I'm like, you know, I'm in this room to stand up for the black character they're trying to make, you know, an absentee black father. So I was like, I'm just going to say it. And so we're like talking about it and I'm saying like essentially why it's problematic, like why this is problematic and whatever. And actually the people in the room were pretty like nice about it. Like they were like listening. I mean, they wanted him to not be in the show. So of course there's like, and it's like, but so they're like, how can we get around this? How can it not be an absentee black father? And also he's not in the show. And I was like, I mean, you can't. Anyways.
Oh, they didn't want him to be on screen.
Sorry?
You mean they didn't want him to be on screen? He was an off-screen character.
He was playing, like he was not going to be on the show anymore.
Oh, I see.
Oh, I see.
Right. And so it was like, oh, but they're having a baby. So now he just disappeared and just left this woman with her baby. Like, you know, that's not going to be the greatest thing for for those of us watching the show. Anyways, so we talked about it. And ultimately, you know what happened, like to Seth's point, it's like we did have a pretty fulsome discussion about it. And then it went like a level up and they were like, oh, nobody cares about that political correctness shit. And then that was it. And then he was just gone. So even like again, as I say, it's like this layer above us being creators who are making all kinds of decisions, who are like saying yes to notes and no to notes and all kinds of things. It's like, it's a challenge. Like I guess I'm just saying at every stage you have like maybe something to face. Like we don't have, I mean, now for us, we don't have an official diversity hire, but certainly when you're hired, people are feeling like you're the diversity hire.
Well,
they're either saying it to your face or they're not, you know?
Well, I think they have to think of you as you're the expert. You know, you're the expert on this particular community. And the challenge that we also have is that we've also been told none of us are allowed to speak for our community. And it's like, it's either we speak for our community or there's going to be some white guy from Queens speaking for our community. You know what I mean? Because it's like, we at least know what all the differences or all the diversity within our communities are, even though we're not experts in one of them. I mean, one of the funny things that would have happened, I guess it was probably 25 years ago now, where Rob Atatui, who grew up in Sudbury, went down to LA and became the black writer of all the black, shows that were about being black in the ghetto in LA during that period, like during the 80s and 90s. And it was like ghetto, Sudbury, I don't know, but he eventually got a movie that actually got made and whatever. But I think the key for us and what makes that position difficult is if we are put in a position where we really don't know. Like that isn't the way that we were raised. We don't know this. We don't have this experience, and they assume that we do. So an example is when we were doing the kink in my hair, we had a character who was supposed to be the gateway for all the immigrant people, right? And so this isn't really race bending, but it's kind of like class bending or status bending or whatever you would call it. I'm not quite sure, but it's like they hire a woman who was adopted by a white family. So she's she's the production secretary in the office, and she's asking about calling Sokka, and they think she's hilarious. And so they take the character who was supposed to be, born in Canada, but Jamaica, or maybe born in the West Indies, but came very young, but in this two worlds of, home and here, and trying to be both Canadian and connected to her West Indian roots, which is kind of like everybody's story, but every immigrant story, and change the character to one now who was adopted by white family, who knows nothing about her heritage and has this. So this is a way now to bring the white family into the show and to have this character that 100 people in the country can identify with, right? And I was very, 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 very upset about it because I felt that we were no longer telling our story. We were telling somebody else's story. And if someone's going to give you $13 million, tell your story for God's sake, because nobody else is going to, And so, yeah, that's how I feel about that.
Yeah, I wanted to add those are great situations, and I think as Black creators, I think it's important to do our own research, and so that we don't I'm Haitian. I grew up in an Anglophone community, because of my curiosity, I know Black folks in Montreal and Toronto from all over the place. But if I was to write a story that took place in Nova Scotia, like in what is that? There's a community near Halifax that's very Black. I'm sort of having a blank.
You talking about Preston?
Yeah, exactly, Preston, right? And I have a friend who played hockey there. Anyway, so if I was to write a story that's based in Preston, that somebody says to me, "Okay, Stefan, here's a option or whatever. Go write that thing." I would really go and really dig and do some research, because the experience of a Black Canadian in a place like Halifax is very different from Toronto and Montreal. Like, I actually did research for an NFB film in Hammond's Plain, which is like a bit outside of Black community outside of Halifax. And I really was just like, whoa, like the references were so different. Like the attitude of Black people in Halifax was so radically different than in Montreal, Toronto, or Vancouver. And so I think sometimes when we're given those opportunities, we also have to be humble about the fact that, we have fairly specific experiences of Blackness, whether it's culture, class, regional, whatever. And then so not to be like, oh, because I'm Black, I can write off the top of my head what it's like to be Black in Halifax. Like, you don't. Like, you're a writer, and a writer has to do research. You can't just assume that because you're Black, then somehow you have.
But then here's the question, Stefan, because the question is going to be, well, why do I need a Black writer? I can do the research myself.
Well, I think in the end, because I think there's a commonality that we have as Afro-Canadians, but there's also a specificity, right? So if I was going to write about a Black transgender, if I'm giving that, if let's say I'm writing a show, and then one character is that, well, I'm not, right? I would have to talk to people from that community to be like, hey, and do some research. But I mean, I think the Afro-ness of it is still important, right? So there's a bunch of, I mean, I've written Black women characters in some of my films, and I have sisters, I have friends, whatever. So you rarely, unless you're writing about yourself, rarely are you gonna write something that's like, oh, that's exactly Stefan. No, it's just you're a writer. You're using imagination. You're like, oh, what is it?
But the question is, and the challenge is right now, if you're trying to create space in the industry for Black folks, right? The white folks are saying, well, I use my imagination, and I was listening to something the other day, which was Toni Morrison saying, how she teaches when she teaches her classes, and she talks to them about write that black character, you white people. You're like, right, and use your imagination, like go there. And that's what the industry has been doing for the past 40 years.
Yeah.
And not
been going.
And look where we are now when we let them do that for 40 years. I mean,
exactly.
As you said, Karen, in the beginning about white fragility, like about the book, what was so good about the book for you was that it's like that race is a non-issue for them. And so that is the difference. It's like, it is not, I mean, we know it's not a non-issue. So I might not know like every experience, but I certainly know what it's like to walk through the world where race is a part of it. And I think it's a very hard experience to research. I think the feelings and like what it's like, I don't know that you can like, I don't, and I'm saying that similarly, there could be another character. I would say that about me and something else. It's like, for like, you know, in the show I'm doing right now, for example, there are white men in the show. And I was working with a white man at one point, and I remember being like, what is it like? You know, like I'd never been like, you know, when I'm in the room, it changes it, right?
Oh,
like
yeah.
they're not going to talk, like men aren't going to talk necessarily the way they would talk when a woman is in a room. But these two, like this is like two older, I'm like, what do they talk about when I'm not there? Like, tell me, I don't know. You know, like I need to know what the conversations are. Like, tell me all your secrets. that person, like, you know, but I mean, I respect that. I respect that. It's like, I don't know what it's like to walk through the world as a white person either. And it's like, and yet, but I do have but I just feel that it's such a unique experience, you know. I don't know. I feel like race is something a little bit different in that sense for me.
But I think like further to that, Marcia, is that we have there's race, but we're also talking about a caste system that is intact. Mm-hmm. And we as Black people are on the bottom of that caste system. Sure. Indigenous folks are on the bottom of that caste system. Yeah. And so when we're talking about a caste system that is intact and that protects itself, whether we're talking about India, whether we're talking about, you know, Nazi Germany, whether we're talking about what we're dealing with right now in North America, there is a caste system that is intact. And so because we are the lower class or the lower caste, and let's say, for example, you're a showrunner now, a lot of people might not be used to somebody who looks like you telling them what the fuck to do. You know, they might not be used to that. And so I can tell you that Jennifer and myself have had pushback over the years when we have run shows. You know, for example, when you're dealing with executives, sometimes there's a little pushback because there's something that doesn't work. They're speaking to somebody who's a lower caste person, but they're speaking to them as like, but they're on an equal footing or even a higher footing. That for some people, that is like something, everything that they've been taught their whole life about the way the world should work is fucked up now. If I have to speak to this person as a superior to me, because it is a militaristic thing, as you said, Karen, if I have to speak to this person in this way, something's wrong. And so when we've got 3 daughters and we tell our kids, it's like, we talk to them about the caste system, but we call it traditional thinking. It's not specifically only racism. It's wound up in a whole bunch of other things, because sometimes it's like there's a sexism there because it's like I'm not used to speaking to a Black woman like that because she should actually be beneath me, you know, in this caste system, how it works. So there's some people are coming at you, and you might think it like we might think it's racism, but it's the caste system that's fucking them up. And so like there's a whole bunch of things at play. And if you are dealing with somebody, a writer who doesn't have any of this kind of analysis, then those characters are going to be that thin. And especially if you're dealing with something that has to deal with today or race or the show that you're working on now, if they don't have any of that kind of analysis and it's only coming from a book, then their characters are going to be that much thinner. So I think it's incumbent upon us, like when we're putting together a project, when people in the audience are putting together a project, it's like putting together a band for me. Like it's like you need like somebody in the room like who can do this, somebody who can, you know, somebody's on the bass, somebody's on a drum, somebody's on, who's a singer. You need to have all of those elements in the room. And if you don't, then and you got to get the best people you can. And for me, it's like, yeah, that person has to have the experience, because I'm not looking, when I'm reading writers, I don't read them with their names. I ask for agents to send me stuff, and I read their work, and the work has to sing to me. And if it doesn't sing, then I'm not hiring people for the race. I'm hiring people, and we have very diverse rooms. I'm hiring them because of their work. Unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to work with you, Marcia. You've always been busy when we've been hiring.
I know, but you have something coming up. I just read in playback, so we should talk.
Absolutely.
There's magic happening right now.
Absolutely.
Well, the white people that I know who've made films about Black culture and that I find are really, really, that were on point, like for me, like a film like Beloved, by what's his name? He passed away, the filmmaker. Who?
Jonathan Demme.
Yeah. I mean, it's when you look at the stuff he's done before, it's there's no wonder he was able to pull off something like that. I don't think he's done the kind of work of decolonizing himself, where he had when he approached the work, he had the humility, and I don't know the detail of the research that he did, but it's clear when you see a film like that it's like it's not somebody who just came in and parachuted himself in that community and in that reality and did it. So it is possible to be other and then make something that's authentic. Like there's a French film called La Haine, a great film, and it's made by a white guy, from a well-to-do family, Mathieu Kassovitz. And I saw the making of the film, and basically for 3 months they all lived in the what they call the suburbs, right? Les cités, which is kind of the places where most of the immigrants live. And so for 3 months they rented an apartment, and they really picked up the language, the ways, the relationship. And when you watch the film, everything is authentic, like down to the camera movement, the sounds, everything, because the person did the research. So to answer your question, Karen, of why should it be us? Well, because I think that it's about also what Sudge was talking about, is that in a way we need to, there's a whole hierarchy that needs to be broken, right? So that we get a chance to make films, right? So I think there's two things that are happening, is that, you know what I mean? Like it's real, like it's economics, it's whatever, it's like whatever you want to call it, equity, whatever. There's got to be, you got to create, if you believe in creating equity, and you need to create these programs so that we get to make films and make good one, make bad one, make mistakes.
For me, it's equity, but it's authenticity is what I'm craving, and you have those rare people who can do that, but for the most part, what we've been subjected to has not been that. It's been bad writing, bad depictions, bad everything, And for me, when I teach my diversity courses, I talk about using Sound of Music. And imagine taking the Sound of Music and making it into an inclusive conversation, right? And you start where you are, right? You start with, the guy who's going to lead the band is going to be the black guy for sure. And, but what happens if, those kids are from all different racial groups and have the baggage that comes with being from all those racial groups? And then Maria trying to manage all of that, Maria is my teacher.
Do you think, though, it's the same movie? If you I think that we were talking about this earlier. You were saying when you just sub in this person for that, and I feel like Creed is a good example where it's it isn't just a sub it. It's the thing. It's the franchise, but it's its own unique, specific movie that serves its black lead. It's not just trying to put this guy in the same movie and doing the same things when he's a totally different person. So I feel like that
it does become a totally different thing. And I think for me, that's the beauty of race bending. Like, there's no point race bending if nothing's going to change.
Yes.
It's like the race bending has to come in, and then it has to change everything, because now you're going to see what life is like through these eyes. That's when it's worth doing, right? Otherwise, it's just colorblind casting again, and it doesn't matter.
But it's kind of like when Michael Jackson and Diana Ross, they did the wig. I mean, that was just like, what? Like, that was unbelievable.
I was the Cowardly Lion in the Grade 8 Wizard of Oz, just so you know.
But, you know, I'll say this.
Don't be down talking to Wiz.
No, I have total respect for that.
To go on your point about certain things about race bending, I'll say this. Like, you know, in terms of like, you take movies that do well in box office, like you give them the characters, like, let's say, you know, Bad Boys or something like that. You put them in a position. However, when it comes to, you know, pulling out, there's a difference in when we go the other way. In some cases, it's a little bit, it's difficult for, and I'm not saying this can't change, and I'm not saying it hasn't been done, but I am going to say it's somewhat difficult. I'm sorry, 1 second. That was my friend Floyd Kane calling, who would be happy to be in this conversation right now. But one of the interesting things about this is that for when we, as Black creators, create shows specifically for Black people, we're also under a weird limitation where we still have to, like, one of the main things is we're always expected to do historical. We're always expected to do, like, you know, when you do fantasy, it's different. Like, for example, I'm not saying if I were to do a war movie, which I may or may not be writing about a Black platoon that's completely fictional, that's not real. Like, suddenly that's not realistic. However, at the same time, Quentin Tarantino can step up and do a movie about a bunch of dudes killing Hitler in a movie theater. You know what I'm saying? But if I were to do a movie where it's like a Black platoon goes in, does all this shit, wrecks up like World War II and changes stuff, and you sort of invent it, suddenly it's an issue because it's not realistic, or it doesn't portray this, or you become, so it's an interesting problem that we're working on now as well, to try to change that, because we still, like, and that's where the fantasy comes in, where it's like, oh, you're doing this politics, or what's the agenda on this? And you're like, nah, I just want to make what if this Black platoon did this and we're the reason that did this? And then suddenly and we have actually a harder time navigating that type of revisionist history than, you know, our colleagues or people who are in the industry, like the Tarantinos, who will be like, yo, I'll do whatever I want, and everyone buy into that, you know?
That's really interesting. But they're not telling you that there were no Black platoons, because we had Black platoons.
Yeah, we did, but the Black platoons didn't like shoot up Hitler in the movie theater. You know what I'm saying? Like, they weren't the reason they didn't win the war, let's say, or they didn't like balance out the thing. So I'm saying, like, when he does a movie that completely goes over the top and says, in this movie, this is my rules, this is what's happened, that's not questioned. If we did that and we take those things, we're relegated to having to be historical, to having to be fact.
Okay.
Yeah, like, you even look at, you know, and in a way, like, that was sort of beaten out a little bit. Like, Spike did that a little bit, and you know, he took that script for the Five Bloods was originally not Black men. He took it became something else because it was Black men. He added the soundtrack, he added the themes, and all of a sudden it had a different context. And in doing that, he represented a Black conservative quite fairly, actually, you know, and he did all these things. And still, people were like, identity politics. Yo, as soon as they start the speeches, I tuned out. Yo, he had an agenda. But in fact, like, he was being so fair. And in fact, he was like, I respect this Black conservative that actually feels betrayed by Obama and is with Trump. And he gave that guy the space. He gave, you know, that's Delroy. He gave him the space. He gave him the depth. And he respected the character. But still, the authenticity of it was questioned.
Oh.
And that's an issue we're still working on, right? Yeah, like, that's kind of wild.
Only one story has been continuously told about who we are. So that's the thing, is that they have to understand that our we're the experts on our authenticity, not you. We are the experts in our authenticity. You know, I was on a jury, I don't know, 20 years ago, and they had, you know, somebody from Vancouver had written a script, and it was all about Black people and having bush parties and whatever. And they're like, oh, this is not authentic. This is not how Black people. I said, that is exactly how I grew up. That is exactly what my life looked like, you know? Parties in the bush, man.
I was just on a panel not too long ago with Michelle Latimer and Floyd Kane, another shout out to Floyd. And Michelle was saying, and Michelle is an Indigenous filmmaker, I'm sure all of you know, but for those of you who may be watching, she was saying that when she like will write something like set in the community or from her own experience or whatever, it's like then it doesn't seem like it doesn't feel authentic because people are so used to the false picture of Indigenous people. It's like, where are the feathers? Where are the, like, you know, they want to see the thing that they think it means to be Indigenous. And she's like, no, this is how I grew up. This is what my life was. Like, it's real. But it's like, as you're saying, it's like, you have the picture of what it means of what it looks like to be Black. And then you want that experience. Like, and then it's like, and then it's authentic because I'm Black, but you want me to write your authentic, your perceived authentic Black experience, right?
Exactly.
I grew up in London, Ontario, so like, I didn't have that thing that people like. Yeah, I would be like at the Bush Bash with
exactly.
Karen. We'll party together.
We will. We'll make a show. That has been really terrific. Thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. And we could probably go on, and we should probably add a glass of wine, and then we'd really be going on. But but it's part of what the world we're in right now. And I encourage everybody who's out there. This is our time, and this is our time to kind of push the envelope and get things and create the world in the way that we want it to be created, and to tell the stories that we want to tell. And, you know, everybody's pushing from every corner right now to give us more access and to let our voices be heard more than ever. And it's up to, you know, people like you who are writing to make sure that every single episode has the balance that we need, that doesn't make us into the villain or the goody two shoes, but really has the nuance of what reality is and what interesting characters really are. So, you know, I say bend away, and just make sure that as you bend, you know, you bring the whole world with you, you know, because I think that's where the opportunity is for us to really transform the way that we're seen by not just Canadians, but the whole world, because the rest of the world doesn't even think we exist. So it's up to you to show them that we're here and that we're here to stay. And we've got lots to say. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. So take care, guys. Be well.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation. Check out the website at montrealblackfilm.com and grab your all-access pass to support these very films from the festival, a virtual edition online. So that means it's accessible to you too. Enjoy, and thank you for amplifying Black voices.